Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We are awaiting some of our participants to join in, but we're so excited to have you here. We will get started very shortly. This will also be recorded, and this will be available on our webpage through our Zoom. I'm sorry, not Zoom, through YouTube, through our HYLA YouTube account. So be sure to look out for that. We'll also post it on our Facebook account. Thanks everyone for joining. All right, so it seems we have a good deal of attendees participating. They have signed in. So we will get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those who are on the West Coast. My name is Brittany Mandarino. I am the co-chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee under the Houston Young Lawyers Association. We are very excited to have you here today and to join us for an extraordinary hour to discuss equity and professional development. Myself and Agape, who is also on the Zoom here, he is my co-chair for this event, and I'll let him introduce himself.
So hi everyone, my name is Agape Ogbonda. I am legal counsel for Air Swift as well as a committee member of the HYLA Dni Committee. So I'm glad that you've been able to join us today as we discuss equity and professional development.
And just a little bit about the Houston Young Lawyers Association, if you are not familiar. HYLA, as we affectionately call it here in Houston, we are an organization, a bar association here that caters to the needs of young attorneys, usually within the first 5 years of practice or under the age of 36. So many of our attendees here are new attorneys. They may be in their first few years of practice. And so we're excited to share with you the insights of our wonderful panelists that we have here today, and a little bit about the Dni Committee. We focus on issues that reflect the changing landscape and the demand for diverse practitioners in the legal practice. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee engages with lawyers across the spectrum of race, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability status to promote and foster the spirit of inclusion in the legal profession. We're very excited to serve on this committee, to be able to bring you great programming such as the one we have today. And we're excited to welcome our speakers. So I'll start with introductions. We'll start first with Dominica McGinnis, coaching individuals and teams in the art of advancing their personal and professional goals, life and firm strategist and the CEO of the Bridgefield Group. Dominica McGinnis works with professionals at every stage of their career and with firms of every size to implement strategies, align vision and culture, develop business, strengthen leadership, and build inclusive high-performance teams. A pioneer of law firm diversity coaching and the lead professional development coach for the Center for Women in Law Accelerate program, Dominica is a trusted advisor to those in law and accounting firms, universities, nonprofits, and in the private sector. She has worked with organizations of every size and with individuals at every stage of their career. Welcome, Dominica.
Thank you.
We next have Kathryn Richardson. Kathryn Holt Richardson is an expert in lateral partner recruiting and supports top performing partners throughout their careers. Kathy's depth of experience comes from years of recruiting experience and leadership, including a post at UT Law as the Assistant Dean of Career Services. Kathy founded HR Legal Search in 2006, and she values both her candidates and her clients by listening to their unique needs and striving to strike the perfect match. HR Legal Search has been named by Texas Lawyer as Texas's best legal recruiting firm since 2011. Today, Kathy is a thought leader in the legal recruiting space and is frequently invited to speak on a myriad of topics in the legal industry, including lateral partner recruiting, in-house compensation trends, branding and business development, negotiation tips to maximize compensation, work-life balance for lawyers, and best practices for successful diversity recruiting. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks so much.
We also have Kalpana Srinivasan. Kalpana Srinivasan tries high-stake cases for plaintiffs and defendants in courtrooms across the country. As Susman Godfrey's co-managing partner and a member of the firm's executive committee, she has secured significant victories for her clients in antitrust, patent, trade secret, copyright, class action, media, and other disputes. Kalpana has been deemed one of the leading 500 lawyers in America by Law Dragon and a winning litigator by the National Law Journal. Kalpana serves as Vice President for the Western Justice Center, has previously served on the Executive Committee of the South Asian Bar Association of North America, and has been recognized as a trailblazer by the South Asian Bar Association of Southern California for her dedication to furthering the professional development of the South Asian legal community. Before becoming a lawyer, Kalpana reported for the Associated Press in Washington, D.C., covering national media and telecommunications policy. Welcome, Kalpana.
Thanks, Agape, and thanks to HYLA for having us.
And moving on, we have Ivory Clarke. Ivory Clarke is a senior program officer and the equity and inclusion officer of the North American of the NAM. In her role, she directs the NAM Culture of Health Program, a multi-year collaborative effort funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to identify strategies to create and sustain conditions that support equitable good health for everyone living in America. She is also responsible for developing and implementing a framework to advance the NAM's equity and inclusion strategy. Prior to her role leading the Culture of Health program, Ivory directed the Transforming the Workforce for Children Birth Through Age 8 Pathways to Implementation project. She has supported a range of projects within the academies, focusing on education, health, and the environment, and is able to continue her passion for fostering improved educational and health outcomes for all through the lens of environmental health and sustainability. She holds a master's degree in environmental planning and management from the Johns Hopkins University Whiting School of Engineering and received her bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago. Welcome, Ivory.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and join you all.
So Ivory, I think it would be great if you could set this off and set the scene by explaining to us what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. So I'm going to hand over to you, Ivory.
Perfect. I am happy to do that. I see Brittany's putting some slides up for you all now. So again, it's a pleasure to join you all today alongside such distinguished co-panelists. And I look forward to offering a level setting for our conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll run through just a couple of quick slides to set the stage and hopefully start to get some food for thought going. So next slide, please. Diversity and inclusion is a strategy that many corporations or organizations take on, but we must always remember that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and sometimes a midnight snack. So DEI is a human factor of an organization. It's often the niceness work. It's sometimes not considered the essential work, but it truly is. When you improve your DE&I efforts within your organization, you begin to shift your culture. And culture is the tone that is set for success for an organization, particularly related to its staff. So just to kind of give an entry point for our conversation, when we talk about diversity, this is often referred to the counting, the ways in which individuals and groups are represented in terms of their differences and presence within an organization. It's seen as the category that's most often tied to optics. So how many women do we have? How many people of color do we have? What's the representation of disability, etc.? It's really about what can we count? And this is sometimes an easy win for corporations because it has the most readily available metrics. Again, it's that ability to say, we've increased this number, we've increased that number, we've increased this percentage. But when we talk about inclusion, inclusion is how you feel. So inclusion allows for people who have differing identities or those presences or representations than the dominant culture. And it's the ability for these groups to be given the space and the power to lead in meaningful and authentic ways. And inclusion involves creating an environment in which all identities are supported and respected and allowed to fully participate. It's a bit harder to measure inclusion through quantifiable means, but there's still valuable qualitative metrics that can be used, and that often are. So I like to say that diversity is counting the numbers, but inclusion is making the numbers count. And then that leads us into equity. Oftentimes there is more of a focus on diversity and inclusion, and it's a little bit harder to get to equity, as it requires an understanding and an exploration of the root causes that are leading to inequities that are manifesting in disparities. So for an organization, this can be seen in outcomes via performance reviews. Think about promotions, and one that's really readily available is through salaries. Oftentimes people have a conversation about equitable salary and compensation. But equity is creating an environment in which individuals can thrive. So I do want to give that level setting for DE&I, and the next 2 slides will be a bit of a visual oral way of thinking about DE&I, but I do want to make it clear that diversity, equity, and inclusion work is different from racial equity work. And the reason I raise it here in this conversation is simply to say that there has become, there's an increased focus on racial equity work, particularly as we've seen the events of the summer as it relates to COVID-19. But I do want to be sure that we're clear that DE&I is not racial equity or anti-racism work. Related, similar components to each other, but they're not the same. Next slide, please. So sometimes we confuse equality and equity. Oftentimes we hear folks just run off the terms diversity, equity, inclusion. Okay, equity, oh, it's equality, it's the same. When in fact it's not. But I can see where that conflation can come, because even if you look in a dictionary, the definitions can lead one to think that the terms can be interchangeable. But when we think about individuals within an organization, and when we're thinking about equality, many times the argument is that equality is fair, equality is enough. And equality means that everyone has the same resources that are being provided to them. The problem with this thought is that, or the challenge, let me not say the problem, the challenge with this thought is that what is not being taken into consideration is the recognition that individuals have different access to opportunities and therefore need different resources in order to be successful within an organization. So equity is the step in which resources are given based on the needs of an individual. And it's much harder for an organization to do equity work, but it's not impossible. It takes that extra step and that extra thought. And again, it requires that recognition to explore what are the needs of each of our individual employees. I apologize for my background noise if you're hearing it. The COVID-19 pandemic and a transition to work from home provides a great example of how equality and equity may play out. So equality means that everyone's able to work from home. I'm sure many of us transitioned in March, April, May, offices closed. We were told to, take your stuff, work from home. We'll reassess when the office opens up. Equality meant that everybody could work from home, true. But equity is looking at what are the resources that people are going to need employees are going to need in order to be successful when working from home. So thinking about, do all of our employees have a laptop or some kind of computer set up with a monitor, a camera, a microphone in order for them to be able to fully participate in the many meetings that we still have going on? Is there an internet connection, etc.? So it's really understanding what are the barriers for a person to thrive and be successful, and then how can we ensure that we're providing the necessary resources to overcome those barriers so that we're creating a work environment where we're all successful. And the image that I have up on the screen, it's just a visual representation of that. So you can see there are 3 folks that are watching a baseball game. One's really tall, one's middle height, one's fairly short. Equality, they all get a box to be able to look over the fence. But as you can clearly see, they can't all see the game. So equity steps in and says, the gentleman who's tallest, well, he doesn't actually need a box. So let's move that box over to the shortest person. And that's equity. We've now given them the resources they need to be able to be successful, to successfully watch the baseball game. Next slide, please. So I'll round us out quickly around this visual conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And oftentimes the reason I really like this slide, it's based on work presented by apologies, I'm pulling it up, Dafina Lazarus Stewart from Bowling Green State. So diversity, equity, and inclusion can be viewed as operating in a system, but we do need to be very clear about what is intended by each component. And so within this demonstrative conversation, I want to help us to think about what are some of the clear distinctions. So the first question asks, from diversity, who's in the room, right? Who do we have, who do we not have? But it's not enough to just ask who is or is not in a room. We need to be thinking about what are the conditions that we are creating that will maintain the absence of voices within a room. Who's trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constraint or threats of erasure? The next question is inclusion. Inclusion asks, has everyone's ideas been heard? But hearing all voices is not the same as are all voices being taken seriously. When you think about diversity and inclusion within a workspace, we need to contemplate how we're prioritizing, considering, and most importantly, giving space to diverse voices. So whose ideas won't be taken as seriously because they aren't necessarily in the majority. When diversity asks how many more of, pick whichever minority identity you would like, do we have this year than last? Again, going back to that bean counting. Equity is going to respond that we have to ask ourselves, what are the conditions that are being created that are either maintaining inclusion or maintaining exclusion of particular groups? So what conditions have we created that ensures that certain groups are a perpetual majority in the space that we are occupying? And then the final question is from inclusion. Is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? Great question, but what we really need to be thinking about is, for safety, we have to consider whose comfortability is actually being maintained at the expense of others. So whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining the space that they have taken up. So these are all, DE&I work is critical for any organization. And these are good questions to be asking, but we do need to make sure that we're asking the right questions, or we're thinking through what our response to these questions will be. And that truly requires a deep reflection to help guide any organization in their work. So I will pause there and turn back to you, Brittany and Agape. I hope that that's a good level setting for our conversation.
Thank you very much, Ivory. So I think that really does set the context for the conversation and leads us perfectly to our first question about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the job market. So Kathy, I'm going to open the first question up to you. I think it would be an understatement if I said that 2020 has been an interesting year, to say the least. And over the summer, we've witnessed an uptick in social unrest related to racial injustice, with an unprecedented response from corporate America. And that's led to an increased demand for diverse attorneys. Could you provide your thoughts on this shift in demand and advise our audience on how to take advantage of this fresh increase in demand?
Thanks, Agape, and Ivory, I enjoyed listening to your background on diversity and inclusion. I certainly haven't heard those words spoken as much in any given year as I have in 2020. I think the question is, are we experiencing a movement or a moment? And that is yet to be determined. It very well could be a moment, but something tells me that we are actually experiencing a movement, partially because of all of the, we saw that the NASDAQ is now requiring, or is contemplating requiring boards have a certain percentage of diverse people on them. And we're seeing corporate America starting to make more and more, as Ivory talked about, kind of like metric-based projections or determinations of the diversity that they want within that organization. And that will trickle down slowly but surely to our conservative legal profession, which is, I think, slower to adopt changes than corporate America. But at the same time, they are their clients. One of the trends that, I guess I'll just mention, over the years, I'm sure you all have like read about how few, let's say, Black women equity partners there are at firms nationwide. I mean, statistically, it's less than 1%. Well, those lawyers don't disappear when they don't rise to equity partner at law firms. They actually go in-house and they become consumers of legal services and then demand that the law firms are diverse. And so it's this cycle that's really hard for a law firm to escape. And knowing that, is something as as people are considering applying for new opportunities, know that right now, I think that in some ways, the job market has really never been better for a diverse attorney who is looking for a new opportunity. I would encourage, especially a young lawyer, a baby lawyer, to have the perfect balance of flexibility and focus. And so by focus, I mean, I think, like Brittany shared, I spent 6 years in charge of the Career Services Office at University of Texas Law School. And I think one of the biggest, I guess I'll say mistakes that I would see students make and young lawyers is they would say, I'll do anything. I just want a job. I'll do it anywhere. I'll do anything, anytime, anywhere. And they think that improves their chances of getting something, but it kind of doesn't. It's counterintuitive, but like just being willing to do anything, anywhere is it's not a sell. Like I do dating references and it's like, I'll date anybody. No, you want to kind of like tone it down and have some focus. And so the practice areas that I'm seeing an uptick in include labor and employment, insurance coverage, trusts and estates, family law. Oh my, I've placed my first family lawyer. I've been doing this for almost 20 years and this summer placed my first family lawyer, and they really wanted a diverse lawyer because I guess apparently divorces are really on the rise. And so anyways, those are a couple of practice areas that I see an uptick in. And Agape, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. I think that's kind of answered that perfectly, but I wanted to then expand on one of the other, I guess, byproducts of the year 2020, which is COVID-19. And it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on, the impact of COVID-19 on the job market and what skills you're seeing employers placing greater emphasis on as a result of COVID-19. And how do you see that changing post-COVID-19?
Well, it's interesting because earlier we talked a little bit about the social unrest we saw this summer. Really, to some extent, we've had two pandemics. We've had the pandemic of COVID-19, and then we've had the pandemic of racial injustice kind of shining its light on us so brightly that we can't turn away. That has, in some ways, I think, created opportunities for kind of a renewed, overt interest in recruiting diverse candidates. And as well as, I think, a flexibility that I've not seen in all of my years as a legal recruiter, especially when it comes to geography. And so I think the real like sliver of opportunity for candidates, and I know this is HYLA and you all are based in Houston and not trying to like pull any of your folks away to other cities, but I am seeing that I'm having more and more geographically agnostic job openings come up. And so that's something I would encourage people to really consider, as well as the potential to network in ways and places and forums that didn't exist. I'm physically in Austin, Texas, and I am, I guess, networking with a group of people from Houston, and I didn't have to get on a bus or in my car or on a plane. I am in my living room. And so that's something you can now like be almost anywhere and network and connect. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes a candidate or a young attorney can make right now is to like allow the isolation or the separation of a pandemic to permeate their professional lives instead of expand their professional lives. This is an opportunity for us to expand our networks, move beyond geography. And there's so many different organizations. We're seeing organizations funded in ways we didn't see before. A lot of money is pouring into diverse organizations. And so I think as far as being flexible, asking for maybe a paid internship instead of an unpaid internship, knowing that you're more empowered than ever to negotiate for the highest compensation that you can get. And we talked about that a little bit yesterday. So I don't want to, go on too long. We have a long program, but I think right now there's really kind of a hidden opportunity to expand your networking way beyond your physical city and geography.
Thank you, Kathy. Kalpana, I'd like to pose this next question to you. Similar to the recession that we witnessed 10 years ago, young attorneys are now competing in the job market with more experienced practitioners. How can young attorneys like myself and some of the other attendees, how can we stand out in competition?
Well, some of the advice I would give would hold true in any market, but I think particularly so when a lot of you are not immediately meeting people in person. But when you're communicating with individuals for the first time in writing or potentially by Zoom, a virtual meeting, you should consider yourself to be on all the time. I know it can be tempting to feel that in this virtual environment, you should be more relaxed or be more casual, but you should try to consider that as seriously as you would if you were sitting down with that person. It is your opportunity to make your best impression. Likewise, when you send an email, when you send a cover letter, it should really be a reflection of your serious intent to get to an interview stage or to be employed there. One thing, and maybe this is an opportunity in this moment, and I really like Kathy talking about opportunities, is that you have the ability to do a lot of research, or maybe go talk to or reach out to for a quick Zoom chat with somebody junior at that firm or at a place you're looking to be hired at. So you really should be fully prepared to talk about why you would contribute to that specific organization. And it's always a little surprising to me. We still get letters or emails from folks who might be asking and expressing their interest in our firm, but talking about how they really love corporate work or really want to do bankruptcy or something that we don't really do. I mean, we don't do any corporate work. We're a full trial litigation boutique. And obviously they're not serious about their intent, but it's so easy to research these days and actually spend some time doing some outreach. So if you are a young lawyer in this market, you should be making sure you are crafting your pitch and your presentation to the organization you're trying to get into. Spend the time to do the legwork. The other thing I would say is be as specific as you can about your skills and what you've done. Of course, you may be competing against lawyers who have been out of the market in the job market for some time. And so when you say you've worked X place, get into the weeds. What did you do there? What type of deposition experience do you have? What significant briefs did you work on? Because that's going to be important to a potential employer. And really try to identify the skills that you want to bring with you. Now, to me, one of the great benefits of hiring a younger lawyer is somebody who's more recently out of law school is the ability to sort of shape them in the mold of the way your organization operates. And so, at our firm, I look at young lawyers coming in and say, can we teach them our way of handling cases, our way of trying cases? So I don't view that as a negative at all. It's a huge positive. But that's why I say you want to approach a potential employer and really be focused. I know you do this. I would be a great asset because I want to learn this. I've done this already. And I believe I can fit into your way of doing things. And the one thing I wanted to say, which is sort of the flip side of the question, and to piggyback on what Kathy said about the dating paradigm, is that it is really imperative for you young lawyers to know what you're getting into, to ask questions, especially in a period where you may be in demand as a diverse lawyer. What are you going to be doing day to day when you get there? Because you will hear pretty much every law firm, for example, tell you about, oh, you're going to get hands-on experience. What does that mean? The array of hands-on experience is remarkably broad, and you should talk to young lawyers there and ask, tell me what you did this week. Tell me something that stood out from you for your first year being at your job, so that you are attaching specifics to it. And I say this, and I know we'll get to it a little bit later, because I do think it is the difference between the start of the difference between being a diverse lawyer and being one that is on the track to do the great things that will, allow you to be standout, allow you to be visible, make sure you're going to get those opportunities there and not simply be another lawyer. And so ask those questions and really look at the answers to those as part of your diligence, but as also part of your assessment of where you want to end up.
Thank you. I think that leads directly into our next, segment or topic that we want to talk about when it comes to legal professional development and how we can continue to improve ourselves, how we can continue to invest in ourselves. Kalpana, I have another question for you. As we find ourselves working from home, or still challenged by the impact of working, kind of hybrid model, sometimes we're facing increased pressures and demands of our time. I feel like we're probably working more hours now that we're working from home. What should we look for in meaningful professional development opportunities in the COVID era?
Well, I'm actually in LA, so I managed to make my way into a Houston Young Lawyers event from the side of the country, which is in part because we are in this virtual realm. And I would really highly encourage young lawyers to look for opportunities where they can speak, because frankly, it's a great way for a group to see your skill set. It may not be necessarily even talking about your work, but they see how you present, they see how you are able to communicate with an audience. And that in and of itself can lead to a lot of inquiries. It's something that I liked to do when I was I still do, but even as a younger lawyer, I really thought I got a lot of networking benefit from being on panels or being able to do something where it wasn't just meeting people, but actually having them see me in my element. And in some ways, those opportunities have proliferated because they're virtual now. So if you are a young lawyer, go find and seek out some chance you might have to speak on a panel, perhaps to do some kind of legal exercise that's done and captured by video. Maybe you'll have a YouTube link then that you can attach to your bio and people can see you in action. There is real value to that. I've been to a couple of conferences where they have done one-on-one meetings as part of these breakout sessions, which I was actually surprised at how useful that was. And I also think people view introductions a little bit differently in this era. If somebody called me who I had never met before and said, "Can we have a coffee?" I have to think about that. When am I going to have that hour to leave my office? Where are we going to go? But now if they say, "Would you mind doing a 15-minute chat by Zoom? I'd love to pick your brain about X or Y or introduce you to my company." That's an easier commitment. And so another productive way of networking is to, as a young lawyer, I would say, is to make a very discreet and easy to serve up request to somebody that you would like to meet, that you would like to get mentorship from, and say, would you spare 15 minutes by Zoom? Because that is, for me, that's an easy invitation to squeeze that in, to have a talk with somebody. So if you are a young lawyer now, absolutely take advantage of some of the opportunities that this new virtual life has given us. And look for ways that you might be able to work on articles or write about your experiences. Again, a chance for people to see your writing and presentation skills, which I think are really important on top of everything else you can say about the legal work you've done.
I'd like to pose that question to anyone else on the panel that may have some insight on that when it comes to professional development. One of the things that really prompted us to have this CLE today was, we get inundated with emails about this CLE here and this CLE there and this, webinar, and we want to make sure that we're, using our time most effectively and that we're investing in ourselves to learn the skills that we need to not only develop as professionals in legal practice or in whatever practice area that we're in, but also just as professionals. We are practitioners in this field. Kathy, do you have something to add there?
Well, I loved Kalpana's comments. LinkedIn has been something that I didn't spend as much time on pandemic as I do now. Now I spend probably about an hour and a half a day on LinkedIn, and I'm finding that it's really paying off. And so it's something that everybody can access. And I just think that LinkedIn is a really valuable networking tool in a space where now we're just doing so much more virtually. And check your LinkedIn messages, especially, you know, recruiters use LinkedIn a lot. So we have our own kind of type of LinkedIn that we pay more for so that we can access candidates. And sometimes I find that candidates or potential candidates or young attorneys or attorneys don't realize how important it is to have an up-to-date LinkedIn profile if you want recruiters and others in the marketplace to know what you're interested in and what you've done. So that's what I was going to say.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to do a little bit of maneuvering. The next question that I had, I think I actually want to move it to the next section, Agape, so I'm going to throw it to you.
And yeah, just before we go to the next section, I had a quick follow-up question for Kathy. When you said making sure that your LinkedIn was updated, I know this is a personal fault of mine, that includes a full understanding of what it is that you actually do in your current role, as opposed to what your job title is and no details. Is that correct? Or
I would say yes. And the same thing with if you're a young lawyer and your law firm bio, if you're at a law firm and your bio should be up to date. Because when we have a search and we're looking for a specific type of lawyer, we use LinkedIn and we use law firm bios to figure out who we should call. And sometimes we'll call somebody and say, oh, I can tell that you've done, a lot of labor and employment. And they're, oh, actually, like I just did one case and I haven't updated my profile yet. And so this is the time to do that work. And there are actually services out there to help people have the best LinkedIn profiles. And as Kalpana said, now it's almost like your image is more virtual than ever. And so it's so important to keep that as up to date as possible and as accurate as possible. And also there's a way to let recruiters know if you're interested in hearing about opportunities.
Thank you. And that leads on to understanding what executive presence is. So in as much as the online presence is critical to who you are as a lawyer and as a professional, so is your general executive presence. So Dominica, what does executive presence mean to you, and what misconceptions about people's understandings have you experienced when it comes to the concept of executive presence among diverse attorneys?
I think I'm going to start with the misconceptions first, because that's easier, because so many times executive presence is seen as bravado or confidence, and just how I present myself to the world, when in actuality, executive presence is how you build relationships. It's everything that goes into building relationships. It has a foundation in trust, and your ability to manage yourself, to manage a team, and to build and building those relationships. And so when people come and we work around executive presence, we often find that there's something missing that they need to get better at, or they want to get better at. And it's not just your physical image, although that does play a part. I like to tell people you can be your authentic self and you can be your whole self, but realize that there are consequences. You cannot escape the consequences of your authentic and whole self if your authentic self wants to stay in your pajamas all day, right? And so there's a professional self that we have to grapple with, and what do we want to show, and how do we want to present ourselves to the world? But it's all founded upon our ability to build relationships. And one of the things that lawyers often don't realize is that they will be expected to manage others really quickly in their careers. And so you are a leader if you are leading people. If you're supervising people, that makes you a leader. And if they don't know how to lead people well, they tend to shy away from it. So working with paralegals, working with associates or other associates and legal assistants all means that they have the relationship building skills. Can they build trust? Can they manage their own emotions? Do they know how to admit when they've messed up and to apologize effectively? And I like to tell them, you need to learn 2 skills very well. One is how to say no. Especially when it comes to female lawyers, you want to take on everything. I think someone mentioned, I can do it all. No, you can't, right? How to say no. And the second one is how to say yes. Yes, I can do this, and stop doubting yourself, or I don't have all the skills, but help me understand what you're looking for, and let's talk about that. And yeah, I can do that for you. And so executive presence really is about learning how to build the relationship skills for your own personal management, professional management, which includes your leadership skills.
And thank you. Just to build on that, then what steps can our audience then take to further develop their own executive presence?
I think the greatest one that people often think about is emotional control. And I like to say that is your credibility and your reliability, right? People want to know you're predictable, how you're going to show up every day. If you're moody, if you're irritable, if you're having a bad day, that's okay. But if it only happens once in a while, when that happens, you admit it. The challenge is often when you're not predictable. Then they start to see you as a poor leader. Then they start not wanting to work with you. The same way with your work product, right? If your work product isn't always consistent, then people stop wanting to work with you. Well, if your emotional control is inconsistent, people also don't want to deal with you. And so ensuring that you are showing up, consistently, that people know how you're going to be, which requires a level of vulnerability. When I'm having a bad day, being able to say, I apologize, I had a bad day yesterday. Let's talk about whatever happened. It shouldn't happen often. You need to be credible and reliable in all aspects, not just with your legal work, but also with your relationships that you have with others. So starting with your ability to, lead people. And again, this is very funny because people don't think of it as a leadership skill. But when we talk about professional development, one of the things that drives success is your ability to build relationships across the diversity divide. Because, if you only can interact with those who look like you, think like you, talk like you, or grew up where you did, then it becomes challenging to work with others who are outside of that sphere. And so build the relationships across the diversity divide. Business development relationships, which are critical. We've talked a lot about LinkedIn, and we've talked a lot about the social aspects and the marketing aspects of business development. But, Kalpana talked about, asking for the interviews, asking for the introduction, and that's a relationship skill. And can I have 15 minutes? And what comes after that? How do we build the relationship? So developing all of the interpersonal skills, the professional skills, beyond just your legal skills helps drive success. And then, as everyone wants to be, genuine. Right? We want to be genuine. We don't want to feel like this is a show, it's fake, I'm somehow wearing a mask at work. And you can do that as long as you understand where you want to be as a professional, how, what that looks like in a professional space.
Thank you, Dominica. I have a question for Kalpana and Ivory. I'll pose this to both of you. I read a quote last month about the power of networking and sponsorship that said, surround yourself with the people who would mention your name in a room full of opportunities. That resonated with me, especially as a young attorney, as someone who's been in those rooms and someone who has spoken up before in my previous career. Can you share a time when you were either on the giving or receiving end of that gesture, and give us some details about that?
I can start. I have been on the receiving end of it, very fortunately, many times in my career in a lot of different ways. One is by having people that I consider to be my mentors that I worked very hard for, and I worked to build a relationship with, so that it would be natural for them to talk about me if they were around other people. From lawyers that I was adverse to in cases, who had a good impression of how I dealt with them, even though we were on opposite sides of a difficult matter. Our late founder, Steve Susman, was a huge advocate of, trying to have very civil relationships with anybody, whether they are on your side of the table or the opposite side of the table, making a good impression all the time. You can be a fierce advocate, but also know when the right time is to launch the grenade versus to be reasonable. And there are a lot of things you can be reasonable about because it doesn't advance your issue. So why not? To me, that's sort of one of the biggest compliments if you get somebody who has been adverse to you to say, I recommend this person or I refer them. And then I'll say, when I was a younger lawyer, I heard a lot of people talk about the concept of having like an advisory board, having your advisory council. And it took me a while to really understand what that meant. For me, it meant a couple of close friends that I have who happen to be diverse women and are in, some are in other legal fields, some are in business fields. And we've learned how to support each other casually, but also in more productive ways. It may not come naturally to everybody to market yourself or to brag about your accomplishments. But sometimes it's easier or helpful to have a good friend do that, or somebody you respect to do it for you. On the flip side, I always tell a lot of lawyers that I work with that if they're submitting their name for an award, for example, send that to me. I'm happy to work on that submission. I find that a lot of times lawyers struggle to say, I'm really great at this, but when somebody else writes it for them, they're happy to have that be, how they hold themselves out, and maybe they feel a little embarrassed. But so utilize your relationships, your opportunities, recognize that promoting yourself is not always easy or may not be natural for you. And think about ways that you can utilize relationships you have to maybe help you do that. And so that's one piece of it. And I'll just, the piece that I started with is, of course, be great at your work. That is how you're going to get people to talk about you in a room, whether it is somebody who saw you in court, whether it is somebody who negotiated something with you, even if you are the junior lawyer in the room, people will notice if you put your time and attention even into small tasks, that will be noticed, and that will be what forms the basis of their mentioning your name. So do great work always, let the work speak for you, and then leverage some of the relationships you have to help get the word out about your skills.
I would echo kind of what Kalpana said, and even what Dominica said about relationship building and letting your work speak for yourself. So Agape read my bio, and you may have picked up, although I'm the Equity and Inclusion Officer, I work at the National Academy of Medicine, but my formal education is in environmental science, environmental planning. So when I started working at the National Academies, I focused on risk assessment, toxicology, a bit of those hard science areas. And now I've transitioned over to be leading a multi-million-dollar program on how to advance health equity. And how I have had those opportunities and come into this space is through relationship building. So being able to learn from, work closely with, and build a mentorship relationship with a number of individuals across the academies and outside of the academies, but also to Kalpana's point about my work products. So it does feel odd to speak about myself in terms of saying, oh, I do great work. But there must be something there if folks are able to say, she's got this background that's a bit different from what we're looking for, but her work ethic, her ability to dig in, her ability to learn has created a space and an opportunity for me to move into a role that is more traditionally seen as public health. And that opportunity has been created by a number of the women that I've worked with at the academies who have been in leadership positions, who were able to recognize me as an entry-level person. I started off kind of as an assistant and have worked my way up, but it's building that relationship for someone to recognize she's got the talent, and most of us do, all of us do. I'm not going to say most, all of us have got talent, but sometimes you need someone to recognize that talent and help you recognize your talent, help you to figure out how to make that talent shine, to be able to bring your name up in a room for various opportunities. So I know we're running short on time, so I'll just leave it there, but I do want to say that both Kalpana and Dominica, you're spot on in terms of identifying the relationship building aspect, but then also always putting your best foot forward with any of your work products. And it's irregardless of what the field is that you are working in currently. I can say that for me, it might be a little bit different if your area of legal expertise is in one thing and transitioning to another area. But so I'll pause there. Can I jump in here with one quick thing, which is we hear a lot of this, especially when we're working with new attorneys. You absolutely must do good work. And there's the old adage of work hard, do great work, don't get in trouble, keep your head down, and good things will come to you. And that's one of the first things I try to help my clients realize that it's not true. You absolutely must work hard, and you must do great work, and you have to get your hand up. And getting your hand up means building those relationships. And often it's building relationships with people who are in the position to help you. So when you're talking about that kind of board of advisors, your own personal board of advisors, you're looking for people who are sometimes ahead of you. You're looking for people who you can help up, as well as people who walk alongside you, because they're in places that they're behind the closed doors that you're not behind. And so when that closed door is closed, you need them to mention your name. And so you have to build relationships with a variety of people and ask them and let them know what you do. One of the biggest challenges is, who you like to work with, the types of clients you like to have, your ideal client, we like to say when we're doing business development coaching. And oftentimes people don't share that enough. And so let people know what you do and let them know how they can help you. People want to help and they enjoy helping others, and you in turn help others as well.
Thank you, Dominica. I think, as you said, it's one thing to work hard. It's another thing to work smart and play the game intelligently. So I think that you summed it up quite well there. Ivory, I want to shift back to you as we kind of start to close this out. And I wanted to get your perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion from the employee's perspective. So we touched on this a bit earlier when and you phrased it perfectly when you said diversity is about metrics, it's about optics. And we've seen a rise in the recruitment of diverse attorneys over the last few months. But beyond that, do you believe that across the industries that there is a genuine change with corporate commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So I'm an eternal optimist, so I'm going to say yes. But I will say the proof is going to be in the long range game. We saw a number of organizations when issues of racial tensions arose over the summer. A number of organizations were quick to put out a statement and indicate that they stood with various movements, and internally they are going to be looking at their own diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And that was important, but I'd say that that's one of those traditional responses. So traditional responses to DEI work is multi-day trainings or public statements or coaching, or even having volunteer and employee-driven operations that do events or webinars or brown bags around diversity and inclusion. And while those are reasonable, respectable, and important things that need to be done in response, it will be the longer-term approach that's going to be a true signal as to whether or not there's a genuine commitment. So by that, I mean moving away from our typical responses. We are aware, we recognize there's a problem, and we move straight to action to say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to address it. And we skip the step of analysis. And so right now, if you were to ask me, what does genuine commitment look like? It looks like organizations, corporations pausing to begin to analyze and understand and do knowledge gathering, information gathering around what are the pain points within our organization as it relates to diversity and inclusion, and then how do we strategically and systematically address them. And I think there are many organizations that have recognized this. As you say, we're looking to hire more diverse lawyers. The commitment is, are they going to stay? How long is their tenure within your organization, and what environment are you creating that ensures that there is a relative length of time that they stick with you? And so I want to believe that there's a genuine commitment, but I would caveat that statement to be frank and say we're going to have to wait and see.
And I would just add, and I agree with what Ivory said, and in the litigation context, we've certainly seen a lot of companies say they're committed to having diverse legal teams represent them. We want to see it go to the next level, which is that you're not just hiring diverse legal teams for certain types of cases, but for your big bet the company, important litigation of all matters, not, pigeonholed to certain types of cases. I have seen a lot of effort on the corporate legal fronts to try to institutionalize those changes. And so I'm hopeful too that will be something we see where there isn't a difference between what the diverse legal teams are being hired for and what the other teams are being hired for. And finally, I'll just say from the legal perspective, I believe the role of courts has been very helpful. We've seen a number of judges vocally say that it's important for them to have young lawyers have stand-up opportunities, or to see diversity in certain types of slates, like in class actions, the leadership appointments. Having courts create that expectation is helpful, so that also is conveyed to firms and clients that's something that a lot of judges are expecting to see now.
So it sounds like we're on a journey then, in terms of, in the summer, we had corporations release statements and people quickly realizing that, hey, your board or your leadership isn't as diverse as your commitment or statement says it is. So hopefully this is the beginning of a journey to making sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of corporate culture in America. I think, Brittany, I'll kind of hand this over to you in terms of closing this out, or maybe final question.
Absolutely. So I did put in the chat feature here, if you do have questions, we have just a few minutes that we can pose that. You can raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat or the Q&A feature. You may also email myself or Agape, and we can forward those questions to our panelists. As we were planning this CLE, we noticed that there were tons of offshoot conversations and dialogues that we want to continue. So please look out for further programming under this umbrella of diversity and inclusion, and why it's so important to continue to invest in ourselves. I will pose one last question to the panel, and anyone feel free to ask that or answer that, I'm sorry. What, if anything, should people of color be doing in their workplace to promote diversity and inclusion? I know it is a loaded answer, and we may not have all the answers, or loaded question, and we may not have all the answers today, but we'd love to close with that.
So I'll just jump in real quickly. I'm a legal recruiter. I'm really passionate about equal compensation and pay for women and minority lawyers. And so I would say that in addition to individually negotiating the top compensation for yourself, to also, if you're in a room and have any influence over compensation, that's just something that over the lifetime career, the typical lawyer of color makes roughly $1 million less than their white male counterparts. This is over the course of a long career. And so that's one of the things, a lot of times I think, we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion. I know Ivory talked about equity, and that's something I'm so incredibly passionate about. So don't accept like the first offer. The minute you get it, know that you are empowered to negotiate now more than ever.
I would just add one thing. To circle back to where we started, getting from beyond diversity to inclusion and equity. I believe means ensuring that diverse lawyers are getting real, meaningful opportunities to be visible. And so if you are in the workplace environment, make sure that is happening for you, and that you're not just there, but you're getting the chance to be seen in whatever it is that you do, because that's what I see as leading to meaningful change.
I'll throw in that, you know, on the individual level, you as an attorney can learn how to have the challenging conversations. We've seen an uptick on both the corporate and law firm side of recognizing that many of us don't know how to build relationships across the diversity divide. We don't know how to address the elephant in the room. And so you can do that with the people around you. It doesn't have to be top-down leadership. You can do it right where you are, build relationships across the diversity divide, and have the challenging discussions so that they see you and understand what your challenges are.
And if I can throw in just one last thing, kind of tying in all of these conversations, I would ask us as people of color to think about what are the multiple additional identities that we show up to our work and our spaces in. It's not just about being a person of color, but perhaps you're someone that identifies as a woman, someone that identifies as a man, someone that identifies non-binary in this legal profession. And so explore what those layers of identities are for you and what they mean for you. And then think about how you can bring those identities into various conversations. Because by you exploring the multiple identities you have, you're able to understand that there's not just one identity. And so there's not just one entry point to a conversation about diversity and inclusion. So you do have to think about, how can I lower the barrier to entry around these conversations, whether it's peer-to-peer or in your broader organization. I think you're muted, Brittany.
At the end of the program, gotta love it. I said I was saying, I think that's a great way to end our discussion today. Ivory, thank you so much to our panelists. We are so appreciative. We are tri-coastal. I don't even think that's a word, but we have panelists joining us from Maryland, from Austin, from Los Angeles, and from Texas. And so we're so excited to have had everyone here today. Thank you for all of the attendees for attending today. And the CLE credit course number is in the chat here. It will also go out in a follow-up email to anyone who may have missed it. And we are just grateful. I'm elated. So thank you again. And I wish everyone a great day and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks to HYLA.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.